The biggest selling album of 1998. Please welcome the Corrs.
How lucky we are to be doing what we're doing, to be working at something that we're talented at.
It really is a tremendous relief and a tremendous sense of fulfillment to have achieved as much as we have.
If you work hard enough, anything can happen. It is beyond our dreams.
We can play together, get on the stage, have the same dream, share in that. It's fantastic.
Thank you very much. Feelings mutual. I swear it.
Hi, I'm Andy Murray, and I was the European Marketing Director at Warner Music International, and you are listening to CorrsCast.
Hi, and welcome to episode 17 of CorrsCast. In this episode, we have a first for the show, a returning guest, in that of Andy Murray. Listeners to his previous interview need no introduction. Andy was the European Marketing Director for Warner Music International and led us expertly through the twists and turns the band needed to take to promote and sell their first album, Forgiven Not Forgotten. It only seemed fitting that we took Andy up on his offer to continue where we left off and discuss his involvement with one of the band's most beloved and influential albums to date, Talk on Corners. Enjoy. Welcome again to CorrsCast. This is a first for the show to have a returning guest. Previous guests I've been able to talk slightly about Talk on Corners with, or them working on other albums, simply because I guess their involvement was a lot less, or a lot of the stories they had to tell, they'd already told. This guest, it's somewhat different, shall we say. Welcome back, Andy Murray. Thank you so much for agreeing to pick up where you left off.
Thanks very much. For those of you who don't know, my name's Andy Murray, and at the time I was the marketing director for US labels, well, particularly Atlantic and Elektra, for Warner Music Europe, and then subsequently Warner Music International. So I was based in Europe, and of course the Corrs had sold a lot of records in Europe.
Your last episode was certainly a fan favourite, and it gave such a different edge to what it was like to work in that industry at the time. And your insight was so detailed, so thank you so much. The last time we spoke, we covered the entirety of you working with the band, selling Forgiven Not Forgotten. And we got all the way up to February or March 1997. And John rang you and asked, would you like to come and hear some new songs? And I guess a lot of listeners have been wondering, and I certainly have, where that then went on. So I guess that's as good a place to start as any. We already know your background. We already have an episode regarding Forgiven Not Forgotten. We're focusing this predominantly on Talk on Corners. Do you think that's the best place to start?
Yes, I think so. It's a useful story in the life of the band, or any band, second album, etc., etc. But this one went through a particularly difficult gestation, which was reasonably well documented. But I might be able to add a few things. I mean, when we last said goodbye, listeners, I had waved goodbye to the Corrs, having seen them in Perth, Australia. And they were just on the point of saying goodbye to Forgiven Not Forgotten and saying hello to album number 2. Now, I don't think they had many songs, although I did subsequently discover that a couple of them had been written. I don't think they'd written all of them. And they certainly took a month. So I went off to work on all the other bands that I was working on. I was looking at my diaries. I can't find my diary for 1997. I've got it from 1998, and it's full of scribbles of all sorts of other acts. So in theory, the band were going to write songs or write more songs. Also, they were very keen to co-write. This has been suggested that this could be a way to sell more records in America. They were certainly very open to that. And they would come back in June, let's say. Suppose they took a couple of months, went over there, March, April, mix in May, come up with the album in June, we'd have it out in the summer. That was our plan. Wow. And I've still got reams of paperwork based on that. So about a month later, I knew they were off to America, and John Hughes called me up to say, look, we finished recording our demos. Would you like to come and hear them? So, well, yes, of course. I was a big fan. Would be very keen to hear them. So I flew over on a Saturday at my own expense and sat in West London, Dublin. And Tim was at the desk and John was there, and they played me all the songs they'd written for Talk on Corners. And there was an album's worth. There was about 10 of them.
Oh, wow.
And of course, I wasn't allowed to take a copy. And it was only about a year later that Ant Drennan had a copy because he'd had to learn. And I copied the cassette. And certainly So Young was one of them that was played, as was What Can I Do to Make You Love Me, as it was called at the time. And there was Uncanny 23. I think there was a song called Crazy. Certainly there was I'm Not Coming Home. I'm not coming home. I'm not coming home. And there was You're Hurting Me, it was at the time. You're hurting me. Don't know what you're doing, but you're hurting me. That became You're Lifting Me.
Lifting Me, yeah.
Which Boo Hewerdine came up with the title for that. And the thing is, if you can remember now, 20 years later, it must have been quite catchy.
Yeah.
So again, I didn't hear much more about them or from them till it would have been obviously a month later. Must have been early May, I suppose. And the story was, well, they didn't go for all our songs, but we're doing some co-writes. And somewhere I've got copious notes from John where I've scribbled them down. Oh, we're writing with Glenn Ballard and we might get Carol Bayer-Sager and blah, blah, blah. So the next point that I interacted with the album was in May. For whatever reason, I was in Dublin, and I think I'd been over on the West Coast, because this is a whole other story, where I was going to write a film, which I did subsequently write, but never finished, where I wrote the story. Wow. So I was passing through Dublin, and I must have said to John, how are the band doing? Oh, they're doing some demos out in Dunleary. So I went to see them, and they were, I'm pretty sure, they were recording What Can I Do at the time. But certainly, I can tell you what the demos were, because they very foolishly sent me a CD of them. And here it is. So I had those May demos, and they were from 1 to 5. When He's Not Around, which subsequently went on the album. Remember, which became a B-side. Beautiful. Uncanny, which was one of the songs I'd heard in January, and must have been a contender. Or perhaps Jim just thought they were a contender and thought, I should give this another shot.
Yeah.
Then Radio, which was the original version.
Yeah.
Now, you and everyone else, I'm assuming, have not heard the original version.
Nope.
But it's all in halftime. It goes doom, doom, ba, ba, doo, doo, ba, doo, doo, da. I stay at night, da, 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 da. Anyway, the trouble is it doesn't go into straight time. So I listen to the radio until right at the end of the song. So that might have been one reason why it wasn't recorded or finished for Talking Corners, because it took a long time at the time to get to the the up tempo thing.
Yeah.
And finally, What Can I Do? Pretty much in its final form. And the story that we can come back to, which I'll try and truncate for you, is simply that I used to play those demos in my office. And come August, if we fast forwarded to August, where the album is more or less finished, and there's a bit of a discussion about is it going to come out and when's it going to come out, et cetera, I had reminded John Hughes of him always having said, So Young is a big stage song, we need to, and you wouldn't in those days be very likely to play something on stage if it wasn't on the album. And certainly the Corrs were not the kind of band that did 20-minute songs and they took something and redeveloped them, or took a B-side and made something else into it. It was very, as you've seen and as you know, they would concentrate on the hits and tracks they enjoyed playing and tracks the audience enjoyed or whatever. So essentially, if it wasn't on the album, it would be hard for them to justify putting it in the live show. And if it wasn't a hit but was on the album, that's fine, because you always need up-tempo numbers anyway. So no reason not to put it on there, which is why John and I fought for it to be on. And as I say, I'd heard it. And equally, What Can I Do? I was playing in my office. And one of the reasons I was convinced it was a hit is because my German colleagues, my colleague Rainer Fokker, who did European repertoire, and our boss's boss, the president of Europe, Manfred Zumkeller, who had been head of A&R and then managing director of Warner Music Germany, and then moved to us to join us in London as head of the whole of Europe. They kept saying, what's that song? I keep hearing that song. What's that song? And when it was going, do, 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 do. And I said, oh, it's the Corrs. Oh, that's great.
And now I gotta sing a line. I still don't know just what I'm saying. Yeah, yeah, but that's the way Johnny likes it. What can I do to make you love me? to make you care? What can I say to make you feel it? What can I do to make you care? You must love. What can I do to make you love me?
So it seemed to me to have passed the old grey whistle test, that people were interested. Now, bear in mind, we're in the business of selling music, and I've got my old sales sheets, and we presented to our colleagues maybe 10 albums per label per month, and there were 5 of us. So there was Warner, then I did Elektra and Atlantic, then Reiner did all the local labels, so German repertoire, et cetera, plus the UK company did UK repertoire. And there would have been compilations, box sets, reissues, those kind of things. So 4 meetings a year, and then we had a big meeting, usually in Montreux, for the whole thing about what's going to be big in the autumn.
Wow.
So it takes quite a lot to cut through that verbiage to say, oh, I think that track's good, because you've got so much of the stuff. And this is pre-CD as well. We didn't have anything on CD. We had CD players, so you could play the final thing. Or you would do a promo version, which is like, so it's the PRCD version. So we did version of this. It has the Atlantic label on. This happens to be Talking Corners. It's got a pink label. And the Elektra one had an orange label, and Warner had a blue label, I think, whatever. But you'd press that up at the factory in Europe, because all our stuff was manufactured centrally in Germany. And you would dish out these advanced copies to take a single to radio or whatever. But in terms of the advanced music that we were hearing it on cassette almost entirely. So the fact that I had a CD of the Corrs demos was a real plus, because obviously I could play it in a reasonable form and wouldn't step on the cassette player and crush it and whatever. Do you know, how much more do you wish to know about the recording of the album? Or do you, I'm assuming you and your diehard fans know something about the history of the Los Angeles recording.
To be honest, no. There's not a huge amount known. The documentaries have kind of, the second album syndrome, there's difficulty, there's some conflict on what we want to do or not. We have to push to get these songs included. But that's really it. So as much detail as possible, I would love to know. Yeah.
Well, I wasn't there. So, and usually when they talk about how do you divide up publishing royalties if you write a song with somebody, it's between the people who are in the room at the time. So if I write a song with you and I say, well, you only contributed 1 line, I want to give you 10% of it, and you go, okay, well, that's the deal.
Yeah, that's done.
It's very hard to come back subsequently and say, as people do, oh, no, I wrote the chorus and I should have, you have to sort it out at the time. Now, similarly, when you are a band and you fly to Los Angeles with your demos, and again, to give John credit, he did not at any time say to the band, look, these are all must-haves. And I thought they were, fairly good. I remember them as being fairly good, but they're demos. They're constructions of the song that you could then make shorter, faster, longer, double up the chorus, whatever you do. It's a framework of how the song goes. It's not necessarily the final arrangement. And if your producer, your chosen producer, which kind of ended up being co-writers for most of them, says, well, I don't really like that bit, maybe I can write a bit. Well, then you are free to say, no, it's perfect the way it is, or right, let's not do it, or yeah, okay, you rewrite a bit and we'll, share the royalties, whatever the deal is. So certainly the history was, as I recall, David Foster was getting very busy. And I think he said he only wanted to do half the album. And I think from memory, without checking it, which you will know better than I think he ended up doing 4 tracks. Glenn Ballard, I think, was hot off Alanis Morissette. I'm fairly sure he was. And so Glenn Ballard was the hit name at the moment. So this was all very exciting for the band that they'd be working with a hit producer, because American media is just the same as media around the world. It's a shortcut if somebody has a name on it. And this is another name I will drop to you. When I was having dinner with Angus Young, and I was asking him, what he thought of Rick Rubin, he said, well, we produced a lot of the record ourselves. I said, well, what did you get Rick for? He said, well, record companies are the same as everybody else. If I say I've produced it, this is Angus saying, they'll go, not sure. If I say Rick Rubin's produced it, they'll go, oh, it's Brilliant.
Wow.
Genius. So the name does count for something. And as I said before, everyone has to compete so much. I mean, this is where the Corrs and John, while they might have felt that they could have done better in some areas, actually, they got a huge amount of attention that most 9 out of 10 artists that I worked with and that Warner worked with didn't get anything like that attention, either because the record didn't have another single on it, or audiences didn't take to them, or they couldn't make touring worthwhile, or there wasn't, radio said, well, there's only one track on this album we want to play. And with Forgiven Not Forgotten, and we hoped with Talk on Corners, we hoped we would have, let's say, 4 tracks that we could reasonably, over the course of a year or longer, keep taking them back to radio, keep selling more concert tickets. Obviously, we want to sell albums, but we would move up a step every time, which, funnily enough, did eventually happen, but didn't happen right away. But that's the principle. And certainly fans, the very keen fans that I've met, because they are fans, are usually not, they don't really understand the philosophy of someone who bought the last 10 millionth copy. They're the person who bought the first copy. So therefore, someone who's taken 2 or more years to get into the band, they just don't understand that. But they're brilliant, they're great. How come you didn't like him before? Well, that's how most things sell. They don't mostly sell in the first week, and they don't mostly sell to the hardcore. What you're also trying to do creatively, as well as marketing, but it's very hard to sell stuff that people don't want to buy. Similarly, it's hard if you're an agent to put the band on at the Albert Hall if you haven't already sold out the Forum, and before that, Shepherd's Empire. You don't just book the Albert Hall and hope people turn up. You book it because you think that people can be persuaded to turn up, or that there will be enough of a follow-through by that time that it's worth putting the band on, which turned out to be the case. But you couldn't have predicted that a year earlier. Wow. If in January 1997, there was absolutely no way that the Corrs to predict that the Corrs are going to be big enough 14 months later to be able to fill the Albert Hall. I'm not sure they did entirely fill it, but they did very well. I mean, it's a 5,000 seater, and John Giddings was the only one who would know, probably John and John Hughes. But anyway, but the point is, you don't need to fill it for it to look full and to play the Albert Hall and subsequently get on the telly. So I'm not trying to say they didn't fill it, only that it was, it really is a line in the sand. It's putting a stake in the sand, and hugely successful. And obviously a very good thing for John Giddings to have done. Anyway, moving back to the album, all I heard from John Hughes over the periods of after June and into July, so another 2 months.
Yeah.
They basically had March and April in Los Angeles. May they came back to Dublin, had a bit of a rest, did these demos, which I'm interpreting as Jim giving him another crack of the whip. I'm fairly sure that David Foster did like When He's Not Around.
Yeah.
You might have liked to remember, I think he may have produced him. And I think I seem to recall that What Can I Do got a tick as well. But anyway, who knows? I wasn't there. They weren't guaranteed to be on the album. So I'm going to give Jim the credit, and possibly all the band, to say, let's give these another go, in case it was the demos they weren't listening to and they weren't hearing the song. And certainly that arrangement of What Can I Do, I think, transformed the song, because I don't remember it from January as being an absolute standout track. I seem to recall it had been written in Switzerland. I think Jim said that he wrote the music in Switzerland and Andrea did the words subsequently, but I might be wrong about that. So it certainly wasn't just written the day before. No. But that arrangement is the one that substantially made it onto the album version of Talk on Corners. Partly because I said to John, it's a hit. Oh, but it's not finished. It's fine. Just get Bob Clearmountain to mix it. It's fine the way it is. So that's the way it came out. So Young needed a bit more work. Anyway, what happened was, round about July, the East Coasters, because Atlantic is on the East Coast, and they were putting half the money up, as we said the last time. David Foster and Jim Corr, having had a clear run at it, obviously, because nobody knew what they were going to get till Forgiven Not Forgotten was delivered. There was a lot more in terms of the West Coast, in terms of input, in terms of what they thought either would be a hit song or a hit production or both. because mid-90s, coming to the end of the 90s, there's quite a lot at stake. And we would have been post-grunge, I suppose, at that time. So that there is a whole other issue with American media where the radio tends to be stratified or polarized, I should say, and that you've got R&B, grunge or indie. What used to be college rock didn't really exist anymore, I don't think, at that time, which meant that the Corrs more or less had to go into, as it were, top 40. Now, across Europe, they have top 40 charts that are filled with things that sell. Not so much now, but even now you've got streaming charts and download charts. You have charts. In America, there was a whole complication about radio play and whatever mixed in with sales, but it mostly wasn't a sales chart. It was mostly a chart of the affection that the track was held in by radio programmers, which makes it very difficult to do A&R if you've got an artist, in this case, who's sold more than 1.5 million outside of the America, as we'd seen, and 400,000 or so inside America. So what they didn't do, which is what we wanted them to do, was to make something that was more Celtic and more rocky. They came back with a record that was less Celtic and less rocky. So I gather, again, I wasn't there at the time, but I gather there were discussions with Atlantic in New York where Atlantic said, well, we don't think there's a hit on this. And probably, even with the songs they'd done, I'm pretty sure not a single person apart from me thought any of the songs were hits apart from What Can I Do?
Wow.
Even the songs that ended up on the album. And I do also have, here's the thing you won't have, here's the thing. Emma Hill very kindly sent me. This is even to the 20th of August. This is how the record looks for the rough mixes. So this is kind of how it was going to be. Now, I'll read you this. I'll show you this. I'll show it to the camera so you can freeze frame it.
Oh, wow.
And then I'll read you the titles in that order. It's unmixed and as yet with no final order. So there you go. It starts with Only When I Sleep, then what they were calling Helpless, which is we became Hopelessly Addicted. Anyway, which is I Never Loved You Anyway. Intimacy, Love Gives, Love Takes. Paddy Carthy, which they retitled McCarthy, just in case it was a copyright issue. Can't imagine why there would have been as a trad song. But anyway, Queen of Hollywood, Love in the Milky Way. I was never very keen on that. And that made way for So Young and What Can I Do? No Good for Me. What I Know, which became, I think it was a Japanese extra track.
Correct. Yeah.
I mean, I like What I Know. I thought I'd have kept it on, but and then Little Wing. Wow. So that was going to be the album on the 20th of August. And again, ignoring any of the possible toing and froing, what happened was we had a big meeting in Montreux. So this is going to be great. I don't think we've done the sleeve at that stage. It's all running a bit late, but it's all looking quite good. Other than, of course, I haven't got my faves on it, but there still might be time. And I can tell you, I'm looking out at the Montreux Mountains, Ochre Lake, Geneva, and I've held up the bottle of Evian. And I'm matching the mountains to the design on the Evian bottle. And this is great. And I'm in, T-shirt and jeans, and I'm ironing a shirt. Phone rings. John Hughes. John here. They don't want to release my record. What? No, the Americans don't want to release it. They say there's no hits on it. What am I going to do? And I said, well, but we want to release it. And the reason we wanted to release it is not just because, I like them. I thought the record was pretty good. It's purely and simply because a year previous, if you wind back a whole year, there was a guy called Jamie Walters. He was an actor and a singer who was known for Beverly Hills 90210. And he'd made an album produced by his manager. They had 5 tracks. Which is more or less what we had at the time of this Montreux meeting. We had 5 tracks. And he and I flew around Europe with these 5 tracks, and we went to the top countries. So Germany sold the most, Germany, France, UK, Benelux it would have been, and probably Sweden. Probably it would have been those 5. No, Italy, not Sweden. Or Sweden and not Benelux. But anyway, 5 of them. And the 5 of them could not agree on what track. And what happened was we fed this back to Atlantic and they said, all right, well, then we'll put the album on hold. We'll come up with some more tracks. We'll come up with some sure boffo business. It'll be great. And we'll put the album out next year.
Wow.
Well, of course, they didn't. Nothing happened. The album came out in April the following year, when traditionally there are fewer people around, there's fewer people in the shops, there's less media excitement, and it absolutely stiffed. And one of the reasons it stiffed, quite apart from the fact that it was the same tracks on it, and probably people were right, there wasn't a surefire hit, is that the record company worldwide, I won't say they were bored with it, it's just that it wasn't new. The two most effective words in the English language are new and free. And if it's not new, it's very hard to get people excited about all sorts of things, not just music. It's books and films and whatever. It's been hanging around for 6 months. There is always the danger that you get familiar with it. Oh, well, it's not exciting anymore. Certainly, it utterly stiffed. And I was absolutely convinced, there's no way to prove it, sadly for me, but I was absolutely convinced that this is exactly what was going to happen. Now, bear in mind, not including those 13 tracks, they had also recorded, the band had recorded at least another 3 songs. This is all costing rather a lot of money. I don't think there was ever an opportunity that there was, or a chance that the band, if we hadn't released it that autumn, would have been, well, first of all, I don't think they could have afforded to sit around for 6 months. Yeah. They probably wouldn't have done a tour if they didn't have a new record out. Fair enough, we could have done a tour the following spring, but if the record was exactly the same, it would have sold about half, if that. Plus, I think people would have been substantially less excited, including the media, because the media would have said, what about this record that you said was coming in the autumn? Oh, well, yeah, it's going to be special in April. It'll be great. You make your job, it makes the job very hard for you. And I felt we would lose all that momentum we'd built up. 6 months away was about right at that time. The world was very keen. And when we did launch Talk on Corners in that autumn, it was very well received. So we now move on so I'm still in my hotel room. And John Hughes says, what am I going to do? I said, well, what you've got to do is you've got to call the head of Warner Music International worldwide, whose name was Ramon Lopez. Very artist-friendly, very cultivated, very nice guy. Not because he's an A&R man, although he did have A&R opinions. It's because he was very artist sympathetic, and he and I had flown on a private jet to go and see Van Halen in Germany because he was very friendly with them. For instance, you wouldn't expect the chair of the international company necessarily to be pally with Van Halen.
No, really.
But he happened to know them. He was very friendly with the manager, blah, blah, blah. So I knew that if push came to shove, he would at the very least represent the case for putting out the record. Now, this is notwithstanding the fact that as a record label, you need to sell records. So I certainly didn't want to be responsible for us not selling 1 million records. The other thing being that what used to happen in those days, and may not happen now, is that whatever your follow-up record was, it mostly would do either half or double. So I was sure that we could sell 1 million. It might taper off at 1 million, but still, if it's in the lap of the gods and it's 1 million, what's bad about 1 million seller? Most of our records didn't sell anything like 1 million. And if it did 4 million, well, then we'd all be happy. So, he won't take my call. I said, believe me, he'll take your call. He'll know who you are, and he's very artist friendly. But keep me out of it. This conversation never happened. If Atlantic think that I'm setting it up to go against their wishes, they will have a large boot applied to my rear end. And they would have. Because, it's their record. It wasn't our record.
Yeah.
We just wanted to sell it. So then what happened was, we were there, luckily in Montreux, for a week. We were leaving, I think, maybe the Saturday. And we'd arrived on the Sunday, something like this. So this was probably happening on the Sunday or the Monday. Jim, also, because Jim had been kept in touch by John Hughes about what we thought, Jim did a version of So Young, with a rhythm section. I forget who. I'm not sure if it was Keith. Might have been Keith and Anto. I'm not sure, but I certainly don't have a copy of it, although I did have a copy of it. He did 3 tracks, and one of them was So Young, and another was What Can I Do? And I had to play these to my boss, Mark Foster, and Manfred Zoom-Keller, his boss, to say, look, guys, I'm going to pitch for these songs. John Hughes wants to get the record out, which we all want. I'm going to make a pitch for these songs to be on the record. What do you think? And they said, well, we're not nuts about these versions. Yeah, but yes, fine, do sort out the PR, but yes, you can have our endorsement to put them on the record. And also, we had heard Only When I Sleep, because I had a dat of it, plus another 3 tracks. But Only When I Sleep was on there, and this was the Oliver Leiber co-written track that was known at the time, for a long time, as Hawaiian High.
That's it.
And they might have changed it because of me, but certainly I said to John, you cannot put out a record called Hawaiian High. That's not going to get any play at all. Well, it's in the lyric. I don't care. Call it something else.
It was fun having a discussion with Oliver regarding it, because the story was that when Andrea first heard Only When I Breathe, as Oliver wrote it, she was given the music by Caroline and Sharon after they'd met with Oliver and been basically unsuccessful all the day. But he'd written this previous to any known existence of working with them. And he was like, hi, that sounds great. Yeah, can we have that? Yeah, go on, take it away. Gave it to Andrea. Andrea was burning an incense at the time called Hawaiian High while she was writing and listening to the song. So that's where Hawaiian High comes from, which is a really cool story that I
what a great story
on Oliver. But it's interesting to hear that I knew that Hawaiian High was its original title as it was envisioned by her. And obviously the lyric's still in there and it talks of incense. But it's interesting to hear that it might have lingered around with that as a title for a little longer than even Oliver realised. So,
I don't think it would have been good for the band. Not because they needed to have a squeaky clean image. It's just that, if you're the Stones, you can call something, Lebanese Red if you want to. But it just, if it wasn't a song about drugs, which it wasn't, then don't allow people to think it is, because life's too short.
Sure.
And I also have a whole thing with them, which I only partly succeeded in saying, look, guys, can you not call it the song by the chorus? Because that's what people remember. And fast forward, I was able to persuade them to call Fine, to rename it as Would You Be Happier? Because Would You Be Happier is the chorus. That's the bit you remember. And before I forget, I will tell you that Sharon, you may know this, doesn't sing on Hopelessly Addicted. She had gone, I think, back to Belfast. So Andrea did the Sharon vocals, which she can do, which she also did on Would You Be Happier? So it sounds like Sharon, but it's Andrea. Because it's the last track they did on the album.
Hopelessly Addicted was the last track they did on the album.
Yes, as far as I know, yes. Which is why Sharon wasn't on it.
Loving you all the time. Na 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 na. Loving you all the time.
So as far as I'm concerned, there was a whole other thing at the time about records that used drum machines, unashamedly drum machines. And having played you that rough mix, I realize it sounds actually more like a natural kit. It may or may not be, but the mix makes it sound more like a programmed drum. The problem is that when we heard it, particularly me and Manfred Zoomkeller, we said, well, this is the kind of European pop record that we need to launch the Corrs. This is great. It's kind of mid-tempo. Yes, we'd rather have something big tempo, but it's a catchy song with a good lyric, and it's it's punchy. Great, and with a good video, this will be really good. Of course, when the record came out, the mix was completely different. We were going, that isn't the one we approved. Too late by then. Wow. Anyway, there was another wrinkle in that this would have been the Wednesday. We're presenting the album on the Wednesday. I think this is right. And we play some tracks, one of which is Only When I Sleep. And I'm saying, well, here it is, guys. We've got Celtic stuff. We must have played When He's Not Around. And we've got, these other tracks. We got So Young. Oh, yeah, great. And we also played I Never Loved You Anyway, which is a whole other story. So some people said, well, I'm not entirely sure about Only When I Sleep, but I Never Loved You Anyway. That's the hit. So we'll go with the setup song, and then we'll have the big hit. And I couldn't say, guys, I don't think that's a hit myself. But well, if they think it's a hit, fine by me. It's not for me to talk it down. And of course, I can't prove that either. But I never thought that was a hit in the same way as I never thought Irresistible was a hit, which it wasn't. So what happens is we all go out and we have a big dinner and we come back, and this is by then midnight in the bar. And there's a colleague of mine who's in charge of promotion, and I can say her name is Sue Wildish because she wasn't a tremendous big Corrs fan, although she ended up working for Atlantic International and working on the Borrowed Heaven album, funny enough. Sue gets into Fran Lichtman, the vice president of International, to say, that song, Only When I Sleep, that's not a hit. Their career's over if you release that single. It's never going to happen. Well, of course, I was furious. And I was with a friend of mine called Olivier Goulon, who did the catalog marketing. And I thought, well, this is completely unprofessional. It's not her act. It's my act. I'm in charge of the marketing. I'm cheek by jowl with the manager and sort of with the group, and I've shepherded them through the end of the previous album, et cetera, but out. So I then had to spend 45 minutes at, midnight, when we've all had a few drinks, convincing Fran Lichtman that Sue was wrong. It's all fine. We've got lots of plans. We've got lots of follow through. Don't worry. And after which, Olivia said, who's French, she said, well, if you did not earn your Christmas bonus before, you have certainly earned it now. Well, not really, because Fran said, I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to put it to the vote round the table on Friday. And if people vote against it, the album's coming out next year. And I thought, oh, no, don't do this.
Did you then have to go back to John and convey that this had gone on?
No way. What I did was I went round to the Europeans and I blackmailed them. I said, you'd better vote on Friday for Only When I Sleep. I don't care what you think. You're voting for it, because if this record doesn't come out, I'm going to make your life a living hell. Wow. So I made them all, and still the Belgians voted against it. So they all went around the table. Yes, it's a hit. So then the following week, John spent entire week in my office in London. We put the art together. I mean, the art had been worked on. I forget the chronology, but we did the track listing. And then he, in my presence, called up David Foster to say, you have to put So Young on the album. The Europeans love it. It's, we're not saying it's a hit. It's a good album track. It'll be great live, but, it's got to go on the record. And they love What Can I Do? That's got to go on the record. He then pulls the receiver away from his ear. It's like a cartoon. No, I'm telling you, it's got to happen. Look, David, you've got to do this for me. And anyway, you can put your version out next year and you can have it exactly the way you want. All right, great. So,
is it the fact that David just didn't like those tracks as well, though?
Again, he never said as much to me, so I can't quote him. I think it's reasonable that he didn't think they were right for America, which is not the same thing. Which makes more sense. Yeah. Which is reasonable. And I don't think What Can I Do ever was a hit in America. So, he's not necessarily wrong. It was the whole complication, if you like, which I don't recommend this in any artist's career, to sell more units outside the countries in which you're signed, because you were signed to an A&R person, in this case two, for a specific reason, and it's entirely right and proper that they should guide you in what kind of records they think you could make to further your career. It's entirely wrong of me as a marketing guy to tell the manager and the group what kind of records to make. It's just that they foolishly had chosen to write some records that I happened to like and that I thought would sell. And my job was to sell their album, and which it did subsequently.
It's mad to think how much their sound was forced to change because of that American element. It really is.
Well, you see, we don't know what their sound was, and it's a bit unfair to David Foster because this is relevant, because my friend Nigel Dick is a top video director, and he and I used to work together at Stiff Records, and then I got him a job at Phonogram being the video commissioner. So he just commissioned them, then he ended up producing some in-house, and then he ended up directing, because Tears for Fears had a falling out with one of their directors, and they said, why don't you do it? All right. So he moved to LA, became a top video director, and I had been pushing him on the Corrs because I thought he would do a good job for them. Atlantic weren't particularly sold on him because they had their own video commissioner in New York, but he was undeniably successful, having done Guns N' Roses and Cher and Britney and, 500 other videos. It turned out one day, Jim Corrs at LAX, for whatever reason, he bumps into Nigel. And Nigel was a big fan of Forgiven Not Forgotten. He particularly liked the Foster guitars and the Celtic stuff. He liked the strong approach. And he was, actually, it has to be said, he was less keen on the slightly softer talk on corners. That he loved Forgiven Not Forgotten and he really wanted to do it. And so Jim, having met him, said, I'll get John to get you the job to do Only When I Sleep, which he did. And I think he did a great job on it. But it was because he liked Forgiven Not Forgotten that he was very keen to do the job. And it's because he wasn't so keen specifically on I Never Loved You Anyway that he didn't do I Never Loved You Anyway. And I said, well, I can't go back to John and the band and say, you don't want to do it. Who else can we get? He said, well, why don't you try Danny Jacobs? He works with my company in London. He's a lovely guy. He's a great director. And I'm sure he'd jump at the chance, which he did. And I think he did a great job on that anyway. Shot in Dublin, really good video. Now, you haven't got 6 hours, so I can labor the release of Talking Corners for as long as you like. But there's another 2 or 3 instances that I was involved in that I could talk to you about if you like.
Please do. Please do.
What more would you like to know about the release other than I got my way, Only When I Sleep did come out, album came out in October. We launched it, as you know, in Luttrell's Town. The very next day, having had a not very nice review in Hot Press, I think it was, by Michael Ross, I think it was. And I was there for the Luttrell's Town launch, and that was all very jolly. And the next day, they went into Westland Studio with Oliver Leiber to do Dreams. And that had come up because it was a Jason Flom tribute album and No Doubt had dropped out. And so they were able to fill the slot because originally there wasn't a slot for them, which is sort of kind of fair enough because they weren't big in America. And of course, with these things, you always want to have big names. So it's quite understandable.
It was mad that it was originally supposed to be No Doubt. I'm trying to rack my brain as to what that would have sounded like. Have you any idea why they dropped out?
No. I only heard this at secondhand and possibly from John. I don't think I heard it from Jason, but I know it's the case. So they record the version. Atlantic has given them no direction. They record a very good, faithful version, but it's like an album version of Dreams. Perfectly good. Andrea does a great vocal as always. They go on tour, and I might have mentioned to this year, last time we were in Holland. I would have been on the first. I think Holland was the second night of the tour, and I can't remember what the first night was. But certainly Ron Shapiro from America, and I think also Andrea Gannis, who did radio promotion. I think they were over to see the band, be nice to the band, set things up for America, understandably, see what shape they're in, get them back to do line up TV shows, whatever. Anyway, they do the show goes on very well, and in the show is Dreams.
That was Dreams, Fleetwood Mack. There's a tribute album coming out for Fleetwood Mac and Rumours, and we're singing that song, and we love it.
And after the show, certainly Andrea, but I think probably Ron and Fran, but I think Andrea as well, they collar me and they say, that, you know, that really needs to be a sort of more modern remix type version. Mm. And I go, yeah, fine by me. We sell lots of 12 inches and a remix at the right time, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
You know, why are you telling me? Oh, well, we want you to call Jason and tell him he's got to do it. The Europeans want it. Okay. Why don't you tell him? Oh, well, he won't listen. But if you're telling him that you Europeans want to sell it, Yeah, okay. So I did it that night at midnight. I called him up and he took my call, unbelievably. Now, I had met him. I'd had lunch with him and he sort of knew who I was. We weren't best friends or anything. My name would have come up in connection with the Corrs probably. And he said, yeah, okay. So I heard no more about it until whenever it was. I've got a little timeline here. So the whole Dreams remix thing actually took until the next year to happen, now that I think about it.
The remix of it, yeah.
The remix, the dates must have been in November. I must have forgotten all about it because I was knee-deep in launching the album and trying to keep it going. And then we had Never Loved You Anyway, which kind of worked over Christmas and whatever. So the next important part of my story, so as far as I'm concerned, I've done my job. The job hasn't finished. The job never finishes until the record stops selling. But we've set it up. We said what we're going to do. If there are some new tracks recorded in America, that's fine by me because we could always do a different version or have imports or deal with that. But certainly we haven't missed the sales at the important time of the year. We've kept them going. I'd say they're pretty happy. They must have been pretty tired because they worked, always very hard. And then they go off on tour. So as it happens, my friend Nigel Dick, the very same, is a keen cyclist. And he wanted to go on a cycle trip with me and another friend of his to New Zealand. So we go on this trip from New Zealand, North Island, see some friends of Nigel's, go to the South Island, travel all the way down to South Island. Beautiful. And round about the time, as I recall, I think we must have been in Queenstown, somewhere in the South Island. I call the office. Oh, how's it going? Yeah, anything happening? Because I wasn't due to come back till the 21st of January because I was having 3 weeks off. Oh, Talk and Corner has just gone top 10 in Germany. What? Well, how? It was like 40. Oh, well, and I got the whole story. And what had happened was our German company had put the band up to play probably Never Loved You Anyway on Geld oder Liebe, which is a big show, which means love over gold, funny enough. No connection with Dire Straits. So it's a big selling 10 million, viewership TV show. And the producer takes the album and says, no, we don't do that one. This is the one they must do. They must do What Can I Do? So they do, fine. They lip sync to What Can I Do album version. Album goes to number 9 in the charts, I think, or number 2 in the charts, in the next day. Suddenly they're on the map. So, oh my God, okay. So straight away, there will be a need for a video. Now, as we saw from Forgiven Not Forgotten, Atlantic was in for 4 videos on that album, the last of which was Love to Love You. And they'd already been on with Nigel. They'd been in for 2 videos deep for Talk on Corners. And What Can I Do is a song that they never really thought would be a hit in America. So they're not falling over themselves. And then they're still halfway through Never Loved You Anyway. So from January all the way to mid-February, I suppose a month. It's about a month. There's an endless dialogue about who's going to direct the video. And because I speak to Nigel on a regular basis, I call him up. What's happening? Oh, I haven't heard anything from Atlantic. So I speak to John. I say, who's doing the video? Oh, there's a couple of people that Atlantic are thinking of. And I said, but are they not considering Nigel? Oh, he's not available. Which kind of was true because Nigel was finishing up a video in New York where he was doing Jimmy Page and Puff Daddy, if you might know that song. Mm-hmm. And Jimmy was doing his bids by link from a studio in Wembley in North London. So I call up Nigel and I go, Nigel, any chance that you could do me a favor? I really need a favor. I want you to do this video for the Corrs. Well, yeah, I love the Corrs. Do anything for you, man. Where is it? New Zealand. I've just come back from New Zealand. Yeah, well, I'm afraid you've got to go back there. When is it? Next week. It's the last day. But I'm in New York now. To cut a long story short, I talked him into doing it. He did it as a favor. He flew back to LA, went home, got a change of clothes, gone back on a plane, went to Auckland, New Zealand, spent the next day prepping the shoot. So he probably arrived on the Wednesday, found the location on the Thursday, flew out there with his director of photography, shot it with the band on Friday, and they flew back at 1:00 in the morning on Friday night. Wow. And that video is one where you will have seen from the sales figures that Spain came rather late to the first album because it takes them a long time to break things, and most people in Spain don't speak English. So if you're selling somebody that has a lyrical content, it's quite difficult to sell. So we had to take the Corrs there many times to do promotion and acoustic showcases and TV shows and awards and whatever. But my guy, Charlie, who's a really lovely guy, Charlie Sanchez, a very good marketing guy, he's one of those guys that if he said he could break the band, he would. And he did. So at the end of Forgiven Not Forgotten, Spain was like the top 3 selling territory in Europe. They were done, treble platinum or something. So he was very keen. And he said, look, could you possibly get them to something look a bit more like The Girl Next Door, kind of T-shirt and jeans? Okay, fine. So because we didn't want the Corrs to be too overdressed. And there was always a tendency of photographers in particular to see 3 attractive women and go, oh, right, okay, now let's put some of my designer pretensions onto you. And the trouble with the band is they're always so polite that they would very often say in photo shoots, well, yeah, all right then. And then afterwards they'd go, oh, I don't really like that. I always felt that they should be a little bit more strong-minded about the shoots, which subsequently they did become. Of course, Nigel takes this instruction literally, and he gets the wardrobe, and these girls are tiny. They're unbelievably petite. But he gets the wardrobe, and of course, it's all set up at very short notice, and they show up the location. Okay, where's the wardrobe? And he goes, T-shirt. What? But we never wear T-shirts and jeans. And he has to say, well, you're wearing them now because that's all there is.
Wow.
So they do, and it's one of my favorite videos, not because they're in T-shirts and jeans, just because they're relaxed and they're having a good time.
Yeah.
And I think
it's a really chill video. Yeah.
There's a bit where Caroline's wearing a cowboy hat.
Yeah.
Sharon apparently goes over to Nigel during the shoot and says, we're not a country band. And Nigel goes, what do you mean? Well, you've got Sharon wearing a cowboy hat. And he says, well, nobody's going to, they don't, doesn't make you a country band. And, but I'll speak to her. Okay. Well, yeah, fine, fair enough. So he goes over and speaks to Caroline, says, oh, Sharon thinks you're not very keen on your hat. Well, too bad, I'm wearing it. Okay.
End of story.
She kept on wearing it. And then I showed them the video in London, and I showed them the video on March the 12th. And I've got a note because I made a note from some of my notebooks. John Hughes had 4 comments. 1, he loves it. 2, can we have some more Sharon and Jim? 3, don't have Jim sing the lip sync on the girls' chorus. Fair enough, because he doesn't sing on that bit.
Yeah.
And 4, can we have less of the bath? And I think John didn't like. I like the bath. I think the bath is great. Cool. And I just looked on Google Maps because somebody had commented under the video, oh, it's on the peninsula southwest of Auckland and it's by this church. So I get Google Maps and I go to this church, right? Go down the hill. There's the bath. It's still in the field.
Still there.
Still there. They feed horses.
Yeah. Why wouldn't it be, right? Why wouldn't
yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, that's it. I mean, Nigel didn't bring it on the shoot. It was entirely a location shoot. He rented the car. And the one change I made to the video when they did the rough mix is he had the bonnet slamming, but it wasn't slamming in time. I said, Nigel, it's got to go 1, 2, 3, 4. So I tightened up the edit on that. That was my sole contribution other than getting
It's a good one. It's a good, it really starts it off so well.
Slept at all in days. It's been so long since we've talked, and I have been here many days. I just don't know what I'm doing wrong. What can I do to make you love me?
But of course, it wasn't a hit in the UK in that version because the UK at that point still were not very Corrs-centric.
You're still looking at March, aren't you?
Yes.
Yeah,
so this is before. So at the end of February 26th, Nigel shoots What Can I Do video, predominantly for Germany, which Atlantic New York were happier about because Germany's the biggest market. They can make some money. There's a reason for doing it. They're not doing it to keep me happy. They're doing it because Germany says it's just propelled the album on the charts. And obviously that comes in very handy when there's a remix because they just re-edit the video.
Done. Yeah.
Not terribly well, may I say. That was nothing to do with me. But then after that, you had the Story for the Dreams of the Mix, which I'll tell you briefly, which is that Rob Dickens, who was the chair at the time, was the chair above 2 managing directors. One of those managing directors was Max Hole, who ran East West. And Max had just gone to Universal to take up a big position at Universal. So Rob is looking at the roster, and he realizes that he hasn't got very much that's live that could be sold. Now, Rob had not been convinced by the Corrs previously and used to tease me about them. Oh, you only like them because they're gorgeous. I said, they sell records, Rob, even in your country. So he was looking for an angle. And he heard about the Todd Terry mixes, which by then I think we had had some, but we had heard that Jason wasn't very keen on them. My memory's not very good on that, but certainly Jason Flom was not pushing them. He paid for the mixes. Maybe he wasn't sure about it.
Oliver Leiber, as he recalls, was asked to change, obviously, the mix from the more traditional copy, as it were, to something a little more modern, which he did,
right? Because
he'd been listening to some Todd Terry tracks. What he did, he was like, okay, I'm going to do it in this kind of style. I've got this inkling from this track. I think this would sound good. He mixed it in the style of a Todd Terry track he was listening to at the time, and he submitted that. Subsequently, he also said it would probably be good to get Todd Terry himself to mix this as well. But the final version you hear on the album is Oliver Leiber's mix in the style of Todd Terry, not Todd Terry's.
Wow, very good. I never knew that. I shall go back and listen to it again. So what probably happened is that Jason did get Todd to mix them and then wasn't convinced.
Yeah.
Now, for whatever reason, this story got to Rob Dickens. And Rob, I had worked for him. I was the marketing director for the UK company. So I knew Rob pretty well. He called me up to say, look, I want to now get behind the Corrs. I think I could do something with these Todd Terry mixes. Are there any more mixes? And I said, well, I don't know, but I'll find out. He said, what do you think the manager would say? I said, he'll be over the moon. Here's his number. Call him up. He'd be absolutely overjoyed to think that you're going to get behind the band, which Rob subsequently did. So that's sort of enough to say about the Dream story, except that there's sort of a lot of comment about, and there certainly was a ill-considered comment about the Corrs sort of selling out for the sake of a remix, which first of all, they didn't do, as you've heard from the story. Secondly, they'd already sold 3 million records by that stage. And thirdly, there was a real tradition of people in the UK doing remixed cover versions. It was a thing.
Yeah,
it was. So if you've got, in this case, Radio 1, which they would now be played on by Radio 2, but, top national radio station, if they were resistant to the 6 singles presented to them previously, it wasn't at all a bad thing if we'd thought of it, which we didn't, to say career-wise, well, why don't you give a go with a remix? You can't hurt. They're probably not going to play anything off the album at this stage, which they probably wouldn't have. And they did embrace Dreams, and it was a big hit, and it got the band on top of the pops, I see from my note.
Yeah.
And Dreams came out in Germany in June, and then we did a new in-store poster featuring Dreams, so it gave us another opportunity.
And then the album was re-released with Dreams added in the track order?
Not until quite substantially later. Now, again, Rob didn't have a history of doing remix albums, but funnily enough, I had. When I was at Phonogram and at Polydor, I had done extended versions of reissued albums, sometimes on cassette, because CD wasn't the dominant force. We would do Songs from the Big Chair as an extended, deluxe version with 4 remixes and 2 B-sides or whatever. And certainly the purists, either of fans or from within the marketing department, oh, this is terrible, you're ripping off the fans. I said, well, mostly, they're ready. They got the album. They're quite happy. They probably bought, if they're that much of a fan, they'll have bought the remixes anyway. They don't have to buy it again. But there are a lot of people out there who might be interested in discovering the band for the first time. So with Tears for Fears, we took them to 1 million albums on Songs for the Big Chair. And with Level 42, we took them to 1 million albums on World Machine. And it was a new concept for them as well. Now, this was 6 years prior, it was 85 and 86, and then I went to work for Warner. So whatever year, so 10 years prior it was. So it wasn't a new concept. I think it was a bit to Rob, but and certainly the remix, the deluxe version, as it were, extended version, didn't come out, I think, until November, just before Christmas. But the principle of doing remixes had been established. So obviously he was then able to do So Young, Again, he called me up. I don't think he called me up at the same phone call. I was on a boat going down the river on a day out of the Thames. We were going up, and I lived in Chiswick, and we were going from Chiswick Pier up to Hampton Court Palace. Phone rings Sunday afternoon. Oh, yeah, it's Rob here. What track do you think we should remix next? And I said, well, actually, I think the easiest one to remix would be So Young, because it's more remixable. It's the bits. But of course, what can I do? Because it's mostly electronic.
Yeah.
There's mostly not a lot of acoustic instruments on it, so it's easier. Okay, I'll give them a listen and see what I think, blah, blah, blah. And that ended up being the K-Class remix of So Young. The most important thing up to that point was, I think, but I wouldn't I, that if I hadn't insisted on the record coming out with those two tracks on it, certainly they could never have been singles. They wouldn't have been singles.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't have had a top 10 record in Germany. You wouldn't have had So Young. You wouldn't have had remixes. You wouldn't have had the remix of Runaway. There would be no reason to do it. You wouldn't have had the deluxe version. And there wouldn't have been the life that allowed people to discover the artist and go, wow, these guys are really good. They would have had Dreams. Well, actually, supposing the record had not come out till April of the following year, well, you wouldn't have had Dreams because...
Wouldn't have had Dreams on the album, no way.
No, but they wouldn't have done it. They wouldn't have flown Oliver over there. I suppose they might have done. But they wouldn't have had the gig at which the Americans saw them gig to say, we need to change this. Maybe it would have changed in some other circumstance. You can't say, but it wouldn't have, the timeline would have not, the linear direction would have not gone in that way. It's much more likely that they would have had the same tracks. They probably would have gone with I Never Loved You Anyway, because it's more simple. So Only When I Sleep would never have come out. And then they might have had, No Good For Me or Hopelessly Addicted or something. It would have been an entirely different story.
Yeah.
Now then they probably would have made, so that album would have done certainly 1 million. Let's say it did 1 million, didn't sell them. So they've done 2 in the first and the second one. They would never have been an unplugged album, because that was my suggestion, because Talk and Corners did so well, ironically. And I spent a lot of time, and they had a lot of success in being a live rock band who can do acoustic, they can sing along, I flew with them to do a Capitol radio session. And this was when What Can I Do was, it must have been in the autumn, because that had come out after Dreams, didn't it?
It's Only When I Sleep, I Never Loved You Anyway, What Can I Do, Dreams, and then remix of What Can I Do, remixes.
Yes. So it's the remix of What Can I Do. They're flying back to do Capitol Radio. It's a big concert, but they have to lip sync. We're on a private plane, and I'm with them. And I say to them, look, there's an edit. Somebody's done an edit, so you're going to have to learn it. Yeah. Well, I think they didn't learn it on the plane. We're late. We land at Biggin Hill. We have to race to Gatwick, which is in Hyde Park. Right. I think they listened to it in the car. And they go, right, when are we on? You're on in 5. Where the hell have you been? Oh, yeah, fine. Up the stairs. Hello, London. How are you doing? And they play the tape. Absolute perfect lip sync on an edit that they've never rehearsed. I mean, unbelievable. They don't get anything like enough credit for their musicality. They're unbelievably musical.
That came across a lot in a lot of the interviews around that period. You've got questions focused at Jim. Oh, how is it being with 3 beautiful sisters all the time? It was definitely focused. Part of selling a record is the looks of the band, etc. But it was relentless, absolutely relentless. And you found that their answers, which were quite repetitive because they were being asked the same questions all the time, were definitely, we're artists in our own right, regardless of how we look, fine. We enjoy makeup, we enjoy dressing up, fine. But we enjoy music, and we enjoy playing music and writing music. That's what we're doing, and that's why we're here. So yeah, that definitely rings true.
It's part of who they are, but it's not all of who they are. And people who see that, some people who see that may have a tendency to say, oh, that's all they are. Well, they're not. They are, very musical as well. It occurs to me, sorry, I've skipped over something that is quite important. It's probably not pivotal, but it's quite important. And that is the Dreams video. I'm sitting at my desk again, thinking about, are we going to have a video for Dreams is going to be a hit. What happens is it goes on the playlist. And it goes to in April, early April is when it was. And,
so they've had the Royal Albert Hall. People know Dreams is on it. We've had Mick Fleetwood.
It's the 1st of April. And I've got the email. Elise Taylor, who's the marketing director of East West UK, concocts a plan to cut a new video from their old videos, which I wasn't consulted on. And I just don't think that would be possible. I don't think you'd get a good result, especially if it's going to be their first hit. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they could have done that. And if it was the first hit, the thought might be, well, nobody's seen the others because they haven't been hits. But it certainly wouldn't have helped me internationally when everybody's seen the others and they'd had huge amounts of play. And they talked about doing a live version of the Albert Hall because the Albert Hall had been filmed at that stage. Because in March, Warner Vision had done a deal to, I think, pay a little bit extra to the BBC for the use of the tapes and probably have some extra cameras, but certainly get the tapes and then re-edit the tapes, remix the sound, and put out a DVD. So that was all. That was something. Again, if they'd not released the record till the next year, they wouldn't have played the Albert Hall. The record wouldn't have come out. You wouldn't have had the Albert Hall. There wouldn't have been a DVD, and et cetera, et cetera. And there wouldn't have been any live footage for Dreams anyway. So for whatever reason, now we had a complicated arrangement, which no person who in the record business will understand, but there was a fund. We used to pay, Warner International paid, in this case, Atlantic, but also Warner and Elektra and Geffen when we distributed them, royalties. They got their money from us via the royalties, and they would pay the artists out of the royalties we paid them. Now, part of that was we had a fund which we contributed to, but in this case, Atlantic controlled. Now, of course, Atlantic never really enjoyed us spending any out of it because usually they would take it and spend it on something. But it didn't stop the fact that it was our money, Warner Music Europe, Warner Music International. So I said to my boss, Mark Foster, look, we need to shoot a video and quick for the Corrs, and they're out in Asia. That'll be fine to take the money from the fund, won't it? And he sort of said yes. And I've got an email from him saying, oh, have you told the UK about our plan? And I said, well, no, not yet, because I really need you to tell Atlantic about our plan. And if I tell them, they will shout at me. Well, I don't know if he ever did tell them or didn't tell them. But what happened was I called up Danny Jacobs in London, lovely guy, and he said, you're shooting the Corrs next week in Singapore. Oh, yeah, on the 11th. I think it was the 11th of April. The budget's $100,000. Well, what concept? I said, never mind the concept. Just go there. It'll be great. You'll do a great job if you go.
Nice.
Okay. And the first I saw of it was when he came back with a tape, and it was brilliant. He did a great job. Of course, what happened was, while he's off there shooting it, phone rings with me at home, and it's a guy called Alan Kennedy. And it's like the cartoon shouting down the phone. Wow. Now, as it happens, I was the marketing director, which is the equivalent of a vice president in America. But it's a source of much annoyance because I wasn't actually a vice president, but I was the equivalent of a vice president. Alan was the equivalent of a marketing manager telling me what to do. And this was a half hour telling off, you can't do this. Atlantic Records I'm going, why are you shouting at me? It's our money. Why aren't you shouting at my boss, Mark Foster? He approved it. It's all done now. But, it was unfortunate, shall we say. I really didn't appreciate it. And a better politician than I would not have stuck his neck out to annoy Atlantic. But it was my job. We needed a video. We had the money, allegedly, and I wasn't paid enough to get shouted at by Atlantic. It shouldn't have been me getting it in the neck, but I did get it in the neck. But the point is, the video comes back. It's brilliant, massive hit. Everybody loves it. Puts the band back on the map. We're back. We're off to the races again, which means Rob could do the remix for What Can I Do? We've already shot the video, thanks to Nigel, and it's recut, so that can go out as a remix. And then Danny again does the video for So Young, because the band must have been in Chicago. They were definitely in Chicago, freezing. And I think Daddy did that. And then he did Runaway at the sound check and a gig of the autumn tour.
Yeah.
Which might have been Nottingham or Manchester, something like that. Now, after this, of course, the everything's rolling. The Corrs are very successful. I'm then kind of written out of history. I've had nothing to do with it. It's all Rob Dickens or Atlantic or both. Everyone's a genius, or John Hughes or the band, but it's certainly not me. Special edition comes out. That does very well. It's then 1998. And they are then playing, the last gig of the tour was the NEC in Birmingham. I'm terribly sorry I haven't brought this in to show you. So I'm on my way home. I'm Scottish. I'm driving up to see my parents for Christmas, and it's cold and windy and whatever. And of course, I go and see the Corrs on the way. It's the last gig. Oh, okay. You sort of terribly so. What a year it's been. Fantastic. Great to see you as always. And they say, come this way. I say, oh, what's this? And they wheel in. It's a guitar amp. It's a Fender Deluxe Reverb 65. A very nice 22-watt classic guitar amp. It's a reissue with the, as they call it, the blackface. Now, this is right. It's 1,000 quid's worth.
Yeah.
Oh, it was Anto suggested you play the guitar. You might like that. Thanks very much for everything you've done for us. Oh, well, this is great. Oh, but that's not all. Then they open a guitar case, and it's a red. Are you familiar with Hank Marvin's guitar?
Oh, yeah.
Hank Marvin of the Shadows. Red Fender Stratocaster. He had the first one in Britain. Bird's eye maple neck. In this case, it's a striped maple neck, flame maple neck, and gold hardware. And it's all battered because it's a thing that Fender guitars do now, which are called relics. And it's because old vintage guitars have become so expensive, they start doing these pre-bashed ones, pre-antiqued, if you like. And I said, wow, this is amazing. This is the Hank Marvin guitar. It's great. And Anto's saying, they've just started doing these relics. Oh, brilliant. And Andrea looks at it and goes, could you not have got a new one? No, this is it. So, of course, I can never sell that guitar. And it was a run of only 40 done for German dealers. You could look it up on Tinternet. It says on the back of there's a brass plate that holds the neck on. And on that neck plate, just says PD3. PD-3, and it means platinum dealer. And they had done two previous guitars, one of which was a Telecaster, and this was this special thing because the Shadows were very big in Germany. It was for a German dealer, and they're only on 40. And so done by the Fender Custom Shop, and it's stamped with a stamp on the headstock, 34 out of 40. And Anto has one as well, only I think he has number 12, the Swine. And he played his on the Lansdowne Road video. If you look at that red guitar is the sister to my red guitar. So I can never sell that. No. That's one of the many reasons why I'll never hear a word against the Corrs.
No. Oh, that's gorgeous.
What a nice thought.
Yeah, that's above and beyond, isn't it?
It really is. It's really, what lovely people. And Anto we talked about it with him, and they were sort of saying, well, it's been such a roller coaster. Who knows what's going to happen after this? The end of the tour when the record never nearly came out. Now it's a big success. And of course, that album ended up selling 3 million copies in the UK. It did, I think, about 1.5 million of them that year and a further 1 million the following year. Yeah. So that became real Corrs mania. And the following year, of course, their mother became ill. That's a whole other story. I don't know if you're going to do any more of these, but feel free to come back to me for the story about Unplugged. And then, of course, which was done in the middle of In Blue.
That's definitely on my radar. I haven't started interviewing for that as a season yet, but it's certainly my intention to carry on. So, yeah, that may be something that I'll have to potentially ask you about.
Feel free. Anything that I haven't told you? What have I left out? Anything that you'd like cleared up that I might know?
I'd love to know regarding John Hughes and his head being on the line with this album. I've read, obviously, Todd Nichols' book. He discusses regarding John, basically his head being on the line and on the block if it doesn't sell at least 5 million, I think was the target that he was given. Otherwise, that's it. There's the Wikipedia article for this album says that John basically bankrolled the album to a degree out of his own pocket. It's saying that All the Way Home documentary is its source, but it certainly doesn't mention it in there.
I can't say it's not true, but it's very rare. The facts are likely to be somewhere in the middle. Certainly, he was with them in LA. He obviously is the person who represents the band. He's the person who would have played the West Coasters, the demos, and the New Yorkers as well. And he would have to sit there as the A&R people go, yeah, next one. Yeah, I'm not sure about this one. Oh, is it coffee time? Yeah. Oh, where are we eating lunch? Or whatever discussion they might have had. Now, that I don't know about. But if there was an A&R discussion about, well, we'd like to do it with these people, what do you think? He is also the one who would have to sell the band to say, what about so-and-so? Towards the end of this process, I'm getting wind from John particularly that the album is going a little bit West Coasty. And so, and I have been lobbied by James Foster Levy, David Foster's sister, very nice person, who was also then involved in the A&R. And she, when I spoke to her or met her, she would come to Europe or whatever, and perhaps I was in LA occasionally. I don't think so. Anyway, I had met her and I did sort of know her, but we certainly spoke. Oh, what do you think about Matthew Wilder doing some production? And I said, well, he's not really known as a European hit maker. He's had one hit, but that doesn't mean he's, got the Midas touch. So Matthew Wilder never did get to produce a track. That's the only other producer I can remember. There wasn't anything wrong with all the hot money, if you like, being on David doing more, and I think he ended up doing fewer tracks, and Glenn Ballard doing more, and I think he ended up with fewer tracks. So I think possibly Oliver, who ended up doing quite a lot of tracks, was maybe the sort of semi-savior from the West Coasters' point of view of having somebody younger and a bit trendy and someone who made Paul Abdul hits and whatever, and could play things and, was a general sort of get things done kind of guy. In terms of the money, I bet they did spend a lot of money, but bear in mind that royalties are not paid out in the year that you sell them. We have to sell them. We give them to Atlantic. Atlantic then pays 143. So 143 is probably looking at a lot of red ink in their Corrs ledger, which doesn't mean to say that they wouldn't ultimately have got that money. It does mean that John and the band were probably living on whatever advance they had got. And we had said they got a reasonable advance for Forgive Not Forgotten, but probably didn't get a huge advance for Talking Corners. We've probably doled out some measure of money. They would have had their expenses paid in Los Angeles when recording. But, I would imagine if the record had not come out in that autumn, that it would have been quite hard for them financially. And as I say, without a guarantee of doing it. 20 years I'd been in the music business, and not once had I heard of someone, the manager, being told that, he was going to be personally liable for any expenses. I mean, morally, yes, somebody might say, I'm going to, but legally you couldn't do that. However, I'm not saying it's not the case that John might not have had to fund them while they're back in, imagine they're back in Dublin / Dundalk, July and August. They're not doing any recording July and August. They've finished Hopelessly Addicted. They're waiting for the A&R wars to break out, which they then did. They wouldn't have started to earn until the tour started, which was in November. It's hard making a living as a musician if you're not getting big advances. They might have had a music publishing advance, but probably not anything substantial for the second album, because they did the music publishing deal 6 years prior, didn't they? As we know. And that money had gone, a long time previous. So certainly in terms of John's status as manager of a solvent rock group, that probably was in question. Not that they would have fired him. There's no question of that. But it's possible that the Americans might have said, if we don't get a good reaction from this album when you present it to our colleagues such that they think they can sell 1 million or 2, well, then we'll just put it out and write it off and move on. And we're not going to give you another penny.
Yeah,
so they might have said that.
Do you have any idea of the final sales figures by the end of the project? I'd love to know exactly, or the ballpark, what it sold.
I used to add them up on a regular basis because I would always tell people they'd sold 40 million, but it's really more like 30 million because the sales for Forgiven Not Forgotten were boosted by Talk and Corners. And in fact, that recharted, particularly in the UK.
Yeah, sure.
So that was very positive for everything. So it ended up more or less, when they took their hiatus and their records were not huge catalog sales, because mostly catalog are not huge sellers. There's comes a time where, there isn't the space in the shops, and this is pre-streaming and whatever. So it's roughly 4 million for Forgiven Not Forgotten, 9 million for Talk and Corners, 4 million for Unplugged, which is genius, frankly, not released in America, 6 million for In Blue, 2 million, which is now probably 3 million for the best of, maybe a bit more, you never know, and probably a couple of million of DVDs, if not more, because they did pretty well consistently, probably a couple of million singles. Borrowed Heaven I didn't work on, and I think that did 1.2 million. So that probably is done 1.5, let's say, by now. I wasn't involved at all on that, other than I stuck my head around the door of one of their photo shoots, which was subsequently not approved. Oh, how are you doing, guys?
Is that the one where there was water and they looked like they were dressed like ABBA?
Yes. That was when Sue Wildish, the aforementioned Sue Wildish, was then in charge of the Corrs. So she suddenly became a fan. And I saw them and they were great. They were all in a very good mood. And I walked out the door and I thought, they're never going to approve that. And they never did. I thought, you're going to learn the hard way, Sue, which is how Kevin Westenberg, lovely guy who did the Unplugged as well, is how he came to do the cover, because they wouldn't approve any of those other shots, and rightly so. So that's, and then Home, of course, they wanted to basically have a home life and, catch up on things they had not done for 6 years. So that, I'm sure, would have done a lot better if they'd been out there. But, I was involved over the videos because I knew, where the bits were. So I supplied the memorabilia, and I obviously went to the Lansdowne Roadshow, and I ended up in the sound truck for the Live in London. You'll have seen the Live in London one.
Mm-hmm.
So with my experience of having done live videos, I said to people, look, if this is going to be a live TV show, you really need good sound, because you can get away with really good sound and less good pictures. You cannot get away with great pictures and the sound sounds like it's next door. Oh, yeah, fine. No, weren't taking in. So because I knew Tim Martin and Tim Summerhays, they were the team who had recorded the Unplugged, I went into the truck with them, and we're there at either the sound check or the run through the day before, and they're saying, oh, the sound, drums sound a bit flat. Really, we new heads. I said, well, let's get new heads. I go out and get the crew. Can you put new heads on Caroline's drums? Oh, okay. So they put new heads on. How are those? Oh, much better. Could you? Anyway, so then we sit during the show and they're, oh, how's it? And I say, well, Andrea normally tucks the tin whistle just slightly behind the fiddle as a sort of mix. All right, I'll do it. And what do you think? Well, you need a bit more guitar, right? And then they did the rest of it, and I shut up and sat at the back. But somebody at least was there saying, yes, it's good, needs to be a bit more punchy or whatever. Without that, you probably would have had your standard mix, which is, without kind of telling the sound crew, because the other thing you have to do is to slightly overcompensate for TV speakers. So you make the whole thing a little bit more bass heavy so that it's punchy. Mm-hmm. So that was about my only contribution to that. And I wrote the sleeve notes for the videos for the VHS and the best of DVD.
Good. It was well, that's stuff I've been reading and looking at for years and years and years, and now using it as a starting point to then go back to the producer and director that's listed on it and go, hi, do you want to chat? So that that's come full circle, that work you did on that.
Well, I think about the bath. I wrote the comment about what can I do, and it features one of the most iconic images, which is of Andrea in the bath, and John made me take that out.
Yeah,
I don't like that bath. Well, he's entitled not to like it, but I think it's what people remember. They remember the bath. They remember the cowboy hat. It was a real pivotal moment, I think, in their career. I think things would not have gone as well if John and I had not forced the issue about the release of the album. And particularly getting What Can I Do and So Young on there. Because without them, you wouldn't have had the follow through. There wouldn't have been that.
I think that covers just about the entirety of that part. And like I said, I think I probably will, when the time is right, circle back again and we'll talk more regarding In Blue. So what more can I say other than thank you again for your time and for your insight and your memory, which is wonderful. And me and certainly the fan base are so thankful that you've kept a lot of the paperwork, etc., from this time to refer back to, that we can now see and explore in the show notes. It's just amazing.
Yeah, no, it's good. I feel very, I obviously I like them and I like the music, but I feel that I did a good job. So I feel good about it.
I think you've got a lot to be proud of, and I'm certainly proud that I'm able to highlight your part in a larger story more, which is wonderful to do.
You are very kind.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. You're listening to CorrsCast. There's none finer.
All the best. Cheers.
And you. Keep on coring.
I like that. I think I might use that.
Feel free. It'll be on a t-shirt before we know it.
Keep on coring. No, I like that. I like that a lot. Cool. Thank you very much.
See ya.
Thanks, Andy. Bye.
Thanks again to Andy for his trust and support in allowing me to interview him for this second season of the show. It's a tremendous honour to be able to highlight the hand he had in the band's success at this time. If you head to the show notes, you'll find a link to Andy holding his beautiful gift from the band, as well as a copy of the fax sent by personal assistant Emma Hill with the provisional running order for Talk on Corners as it stood then. Andy also shared with us a promotional poster developed to promote the release of the band's Royal Albert Hall gig on both VHS and DVD. This ultimately wasn't approved by the band, so wasn't used in stores at any time. But again, a link for you to see this can be found in the show notes. I would again be really grateful if you were to write a review or comment on the platform you're listening on. Thank you for continuing to share the show with others on social media, and a special thanks to those that sent DMs and emails after the last episode to show their appreciation and the impact the new discoveries had had on listening to the album again, an album that they've known for decades. If you wish to discuss this episode further with other fans, feel free to join the show's Discord server. Links can be found in the show notes or on CorrsCast.com. If you enjoy the show and wish to support by contributing to its running costs, this can be done via Patreon at patreon.com/CorrsCast. And until next time, thank you for listening. You've been listening to CorrsCast. Keep on coring.
A friend of mine and I were working on a song that we wrote together. And I said, this sounds like Fleetwood Mac. And this is before Dreams, of course. This is in May, June, before they were just about to go back to LA to do some more recording. We should make this for the Corrs. Let's get a girl in to sing it. So we got in various people and we recorded the song, which is called Help Me Find My Heart. And I wrote the lyrics specifically for Andrea.
Oh, wow.
I got it to James Foster Levy on a CD, and she came back to me saying, yeah, no, it's good. It didn't quite make the cut, but thanks very much. Appreciate the song. And if I'd got it on the album, it would have made me and my pal $200,000 each.
Whoa.
But now, of course, you're then doing the chorus out of a song. So, but I felt that it was as good as some of the co-writes, because that's the trouble with song demos. That's a whole other thing. You're trying to get people to connect with the song. And also leave enough space so that the artist can do something with it. It's a whole discipline that I've not yet necessarily mastered.
There's a lot of, especially around that time where you say they're open to co-writing. Great. There's so much to go down and consider and think of what could have been, and it's tricky. But it's all.
It's probably a good thing for me that they didn't do it, because they probably would have been deeply resentful, and rightly so, if it wasn't a big hit single. If it was a big hit, fine. But then if the minute the word got out that I'd written it, you could be sure that people would go, well, that can't be any good. So probably never would have been a single, in which case it would have professionally probably driven a schism between us, because they were going, well, every time we sell a record, we're paying this guy.
You're paying that guy, yeah.
That's not very fair. So on the other hand, just the impetus of doing it helped me finish a song that I'm very pleased with.
Yeah.
So there you go.
That's worth.
I got a song out of it.
Definitely, exactly.